War was something the Catal understood, or so they thought. The galactic concord had witnessed countless species rise and fall through war, each following the same predictable patterns. Battles had winners and losers, warriors had limits, and when an enemy was overwhelmed, they retreated or surrendered. That was how combat worked across the stars. Then they met humans, and the Catal learned the hard way that Deathworlders don't have a goddamn off switch. The Catal were an empire of logic and precision. Their battle doctrines were calculated, their war strategies refined over centuries. Every move was methodical, every counterattack expected, so when they launched their first skirmishes against humanity, they assumed it would be the same. A simple war. The Catal had superior numbers, advanced plasma weaponry, and neural command. Fleets that moved as one. They had crushed a dozen species before. The humans? They had outdated projectile weapons, barely space-worthy ships, and an alarming tendency to fight among themselves. The Catal strategists laughed. The war would be over in months. That was the first mistake. Row 17 was an unremarkable mining outpost on the edges of human space. A perfect target. The Catal expected light resistance, maybe a token fleet of human ships before they fled or surrendered. So when the Catal landed with a force of 10,000 troops, they were surprised to see the human defenders were only a few hundred. It should have been a massacre. Instead, it was the first nightmare. The humans did not flee. They did not surrender. They did not stop. They fought like cornered beasts. The first wave of Catal troops landed with standard engagement protocols. Precision. Strikes, overwhelming force, tactical elimination. The humans should have broken immediately. Instead, they fought harder. Cow warriors fell, and the humans kept coming. Wounded, bleeding, running out of ammunition, but still coming. When the Catal realized the humans weren't following. Normal combat doctrine. They sent in reinforcements. The humans smiled, and that's when the Catal understood something horrifying. They had walked into a trap. The Catal commanders were perplexed. Their soldiers reported human forces pushing forward, even when mortally wounded. Limbs missing, organs failing, bodies riddled with holes, yet they refused to fall. Some of the humans were even laughing as they fought, and worse, the injured ones, the ones who logically should have stayed down, they kept getting back up. The Catal's second mistake? Thinking this was a battle they could win, because the war had only just begun. The reports from Row 17 were met with confusion. The battle should have lasted hours. It lasted days. The casualties should have been minimal for the Catal. Instead, they had lost thousands. The humans had been outnumbered nearly 50 to 1, yet they held their ground with terrifying efficiency. This wasn't how wars were fought. The Catal High Command dismissed the reports at first. Clearly their warriors had exaggerated. It was impossible for a species to fight through fatal wounds. No creature, no matter how resilient, could function beyond physiological limits. But then other reports started coming in. Human warships engaging despite catastrophic damage. Pilots who remained conscious and continued fighting while their ships broke apart around them. Soldiers who suffered mortal wounds and still charged forward, refusing to die until they physically could not move. It was not strategy. It was not tactics. It was something else. Something unnatural. And that was when the Catal made their third mistake. They assumed it was a fluke. The Catal were not fools. They believed in the power of data, and so they decided to gather intelligence the way they always had. With surgical precision, a single scout unit, an elite force of Catal warriors, was dispatched to observe and engage a human combat unit on a remote battlefield. Their mission? Capture a live human soldier, observe their battlefield behavior, identify weaknesses. They never even made it past the first objective. The Catal squad, 20 of their best, found a small human patrol on a ruined colony world. 5 humans, scouting the area, lightly armed. An easy target. The Catal activated their cloaking fields, moving silently through the wreckage. Their weapons were set to stun. The humans would never see them coming, or so they thought. The moment they stepped within range, the lead human, a grizzled veteran with a scar across his cheek, turned his head and looked directly at them. Knew it, he muttered. Then he smiled, and the Catal felt fear for the first time. The Catal struck first, firing precise energy bursts designed to incapacitate. The humans should have dropped instantly. They didn't. One took a shot to the chest, stumbled back, then gritted his teeth, shook his head, and fired back. Another took a direct hit to the shoulder, arm going limp, so he simply switched hands and kept shooting. The K'tau's elite warriors panicked. The humans moved like predators, using cover, coordinating without speaking. One of the K'tau vanished behind a wall, only to be yanked backward by the human who had already flanked them. "Gotcha," the human whispered. A knife flashed. The K'tau screamed, and then the real horror began. The K'tau had fought many species before. Most fought with caution, preserving their lives where possible. Even the most aggressive warriors knew when to retreat. But humans didn't fight to win. They fought to end you. One human took a plasma round to the leg and kept charging, his expression angry, not afraid. Another was laughing, even as blood dripped from his wounds. This wasn't a battle. This was a hunt. The K'tau warriors, the elite among their kind, the finest soldiers of the Empire, ran. And the humans let them because they wanted them to tell. The others, the survivors, only 3 of the original 20, barely made it back to their ship. They sent their report with shaking hands. Do not engage. Do not provoke. Do not fight them head on. They do not stop. They do not slow down. They do not know when to quit. We have no word for what they are. Only one thing is certain. The humans are monsters. The reports had shaken the K'tau High Command. Warriors, elite warriors, had fled from 5 humans. This was unacceptable. Pride was everything to the K'tau. Their entire species had built its empire on the belief that they were the greatest warriors in the galaxy. That belief was now cracking. To re-establish order, they needed a demonstration, a show of strength. And so Supreme Commander Zeltor did what K'tau leaders had done for centuries when faced with defiance. He issued a challenge, a duel. One of their finest warriors would fight a human, one-on-one. No weapons, no tricks, no interference. If the human lost, if they died properly as expected, it would prove that the reports had been exaggerated. It would remind the Empire that K'tau warriors were still supreme. And if the human won, well, that possibility was never considered. The human military laughed when they received the challenge. "Oh, they want a one-on-one fight?" General Thompson had said, rubbing his temples. "And they think that will prove something? They're warriors. It's how they settle disputes." One of the advisors replied. General Thompson sighed. "Fine. Send Carter." A murmur ran on through the room. Sergeant Isaac Carter was a legend. A towering mass of muscle, scars, and sheer refusal to die. They called him Bull because taking him down was like trying to stop a charging beast. He had survived orbital drops, hand-to-hand, skirmishes with creatures twice his size, and, according to rumors, had once kept fighting after technically being clinically dead for 3 minutes. If anyone was going to prove the K'tau very, very wrong, it was him. The duel took place in a grand arena on the K'tau homeworld. Thousands gathered to watch. The K'tau warrior chosen for the fight, High Champion Varkosh, was a monster of his own, 7 feet tall, plated in natural armor, with claws like daggers. The duel was meant to last seconds. Varkosh would strike, the human would fall, and the K'tau would reassert their dominance. That's not what happened. Varkosh didn't hesitate. The moment the signal was given, he launched himself forward. His claws slashed across Carter's chest with a force that should have torn him in half. The arena fell silent. Carter stumbled. Blood dripped from the wound. Then he looked down at it, touched it, and sighed. "Great," he muttered. Another shirt ruined. Then he grinned and the K'tau learned fear again. Varkosh did not understand. No creature had ever taken a full force strike from him and kept standing. No sane warrior would respond with a smile. He struck again, harder, faster. Claws raked across Carter's arm, his side, his ribs. Blood splattered across the floor. Carter just kept coming. Each time Varkosh landed a blow, Carter responded with one of his own. A brutal punch to the gut, an elbow to the jaw, a headbutt that sent the K'tau champion reeling. Pain meant nothing to him. This wasn't a fight, it was attrition, and Carter had no off switch. The audience had expected a swift victory. Now they were whispering nervously. Carter wasn't fighting like them. A K'tau warrior aimed for efficiency, ending fights with precise, calculated strikes. Carter didn't fight to win, he fought to end it. When Varkosh hit him, he took this pain, absorbed it, used it. When his ribs cracked, he fought harder. When his vision blurred, he pushed through. A Catal warrior would retreat, regroup, plan. Carter didn't stop. He didn't know how to stop. Varkosh's strikes were getting slower, his breathing heavier. Carter, he was still grinning. "You done?" he asked, cracking his knuckles. Varkosh roared in frustration and charged. Carter sidestepped, grabbed the Catal's arm, twisted. There was a loud, sickening snap. Varkosh screamed. The audience froze. This was impossible. A Catal warrior did not scream. But Carter wasn't done. He tackled Varkosh to the ground and pummeled him. Fists like sledgehammers slammed into the alien's face over and over. The arena was silent except for the sound of bone breaking. Finally, Carter stopped. Varkosh was barely conscious. His body broken, Carter stood up, stretched, and walked away. He didn't even look at the Catal leaders. He just muttered, "Next time, send someone who can keep up," and left. For the first time in history, a Catal duel had ended with their champion lying broken in the dust. For the first time in history. Their belief in their own superiority had been shattered. Humans did not fight like other species. They did not stop. They did not hesitate. They did not have a goddamn off switch. The Catal finally understood what the reports had been saying all along. Humans were not warriors. They were something worse. They were survivors. And that made them the most terrifying enemy the Catal had ever faced. The duel should have been the end of it. A simple, honorable combat to put the humans in their place. Instead, it had done the opposite. Varkosh, their champion, was crippled. His arm mangled beyond repair. His pride shattered. And Carter? Carter had walked away like it was just another Tuesday. The Catal High Command was in chaos. The council chambers, usually a place of rigid discipline, were filled with hushed, nervous whispers. They had expected humanity to be a minor annoyance, another upstart species to be conquered or assimilated. Now they faced a terrifying question. If one human could do that, what could an army of them do? For the first time in Catal history, their leaders hesitated, and that hesitation was all it took for the galaxy to notice. The duel had been broadcast live to select members of the Galactic Council. A few had tuned in, expecting to witness humanity's inevitable downfall. Instead, they saw something that shouldn't have been possible. An apex predator breaking one of the galaxy's most feared warriors. News spread fast. Within days, every major power in the galaxy had obtained footage of the fight. They watched in stunned silence as Carter absorbed blow after blow, his body bleeding, bones cracking, yet refusing to fall. They watched as he wore down a Catal champion the way a predator exhausts its prey. And most importantly, they watched him stop. Not because he was defeated, not because of mercy, but because he had made his point. He had chosen to walk away. And that was the scariest part, because it meant humans could end fights whenever they wanted to. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session. The topic? The human threat. For centuries, the Council had operated under a simple truth. War was predictable. Yes, some species were stronger, faster, or smarter than others, but they all followed the same rules. Wars had limits, but humans had no limits. They fought when wounded. They fought when dying. They fought even when winning was no longer possible. How do you defeat something that doesn't know how to quit? The Council was divided. Some argued for immediate action. Humanity must be contained before it became a real problem. Others, however, had a far more terrifying suggestion. We should never fight them at all. For the first time in galactic history, a major war was canceled before it even began. Not because of diplomacy, not because of treaties, but because nobody wanted to fight humans anymore. The Catal, once eager for battle, refused to escalate things further. They withdrew their fleets, suspended their expansion plans. The other empires followed suit. Trade agreements were rewritten overnight. Military alliances were quietly adjusted. Some species tried to befriend humanity, others simply avoided them altogether. And the few who still considered fighting them? They watched the duel footage one more time and changed their minds. Back on Earth, humans had no idea what had just happened. To them, the duel was just another military demonstration, an entertaining display of strength. Sergeant Carter went back to his unit, got some stitches, complained about his ruined shirt. The galactic community, however, knew better. They had seen what lurked beneath the surface of humanity. Not just strength, not just endurance, but the sheer terrifying reality of a species that didn't know when to stop. And so, without ever realizing it, humanity had secured its place in the stars. Not through war, not through diplomacy, but through the simple, undeniable truth that no species in their right mind wanted to fight something that didn't have an off switch. For all their technology, all their wisdom, and all their experience with war, the galactic powers had always operated under a single assumption. Everything stops fighting eventually. A soldier reaches their limit. A body succumbs to injuries. A warrior knows when to surrender. But humans? Humans kept going, and that was the most terrifying realization of all. It wasn't just about strength or endurance. It wasn't even about strategy. It was the simple fact that humans fought until they were physically incapable of continuing, and sometimes, even then, they still kept fighting. The Katal warlords had always believed themselves superior. They had built their empire on discipline, strategy, and controlled aggression. They had fought dozens of species, crushed countless enemies, and yet when their champion, Varkosh, faced a single human, they saw something that had never happened before. Their warrior had landed lethal blows, blows that should have ended the fight, but Carter had kept standing. No matter how many times he was struck, how much pain he endured, he refused to stay down. The duel had only ended because Carter chose to stop fighting. Varkosh hadn't been defeated by brute force. He had been defeated by something worse, a species that didn't have an off switch. After the duel, the Katal was shaken. But before they made any official decisions, their scientists conducted one final test. They studied the footage, analyzed human combat physiology, and what they discovered made them sick. Humans shouldn't be able to do what they do. Their nervous systems were wired for pain tolerance beyond reasonable limits. Their muscles could still function long after other species would have collapsed. But worst of all, their brains had a unique override system, a backup instinct that kicked in when all logical responses said to stop. The do or die mode, when humans were pushed beyond their breaking point, when their bodies should have given up. Something inside them just refused to let go. Even unconscious, some humans still tried to fight. Some of their soldiers died standing up. And that was when the Katal made their decision. They would never fight humanity again. The rest of the Galactic Council received the Katal's findings. For many, it was the final piece of the puzzle. Before this, humans had been seen as tough, resilient, even dangerous. Now they were something else entirely. They weren't just another warrior species. They were the thing that warriors feared. And so, without ever announcing it, without drafting a single treaty, the galactic powers made an unspoken agreement. Nobody starts a war with Earth, not because of treaties, not because of alliances, but because there was no winning against something that didn't stop fighting, even when it should have been impossible. Meanwhile, humanity went about its business blissfully, unaware that it had just silently conquered the galaxy without firing a single shot. Sergeant Carter? He was sitting in a military hospital, complaining about how much the food sucked. His commanding officer, filing paperwork, annoyed at the mess the duel had caused. Earth's leaders, completely unaware that every major empire in the galaxy had collectively decided to never pick a fight with them. Humanity remained oblivious. The rest of the galaxy, however, they would never forget the day they realized humans don't have an off switch. Every species had a breaking point. Every warrior, no matter how skilled, eventually stopped fighting, and yet the human never did. The Katal warlords had waited for it. The Galactic Council had expected it. Even the humans' own allies had feared it. The moment when Sergeant Carter would collapse, when his body would finally fail him, when the duel would end, not because of mercy, not because of rules, but because there was simply nothing left in him. But it never happened, because humans don't break the way other species do. The Katal weren't just defeated that day. They were forced to confront an impossible truth. They had fought monsters before, faced relentless enemies, clashed with fearless warriors, but they had never encountered a species that did not recognize its own limits. Sergeant Carter should have been on the ground, twitching in pain, gasping for breath. Instead, he was standing over their champion, barely holding himself together but still ready to fight. And that was when the realization hit them like a warship dropping out of FTL. Humans don't stop fighting until they're physically incapable of continuing. And even then, there's still a chance they might get back up. The Catal left that day with one rule burned into their war doctrine: never fight a human in a battle of endurance. Never let them dig in. Never let them adapt. Because once a human committed to a fight, there was no telling when or if they would ever stop. It wasn't just about winning a battle anymore. It was about survival. And for the first time in their empire's long history, the Catal chose to avoid war, not out of fear of Earth's armies, not out of respect for its weapons, but because they had finally found an enemy that could not be broken. After the duel, the footage spread. Whispers turned into urgent conversations. In war councils across the stars, reports were drafted. Strategies were revised. Borders were reconsidered. Because if one human could fight like this, what would happen in a real war? How do you defeat an enemy that doesn't recognize defeat? The answer was simple. You don't. You just hope you never have to find out. And that day, without Earth even knowing, the galaxy decided to never ever test humanity's breaking point again. The Catal warlords had always prided themselves on their ability to measure an opponent. They had fought countless species, studied their weaknesses, exploited their limits, but with humans there was no limit, and that changed everything. It wasn't just about avoiding war with Earth. It wasn't even about respect. It was about self-preservation. If a single human, a lone soldier, could fight beyond all reason, all physical constraints, what would an entire army of them be like? What would a species-wide war effort look like? The answer was clear. It was a war no one could afford to fight. No documents were signed. No grand declarations were made. But that day, a decision was reached across the galaxy. Earth would be left alone, not because of diplomacy, not because of treaties, but because for the first time, the galaxy had encountered an enemy that did not acknowledge its own limits. And that was a fight no empire was willing to start. Future generations of Catal warriors would hear the story. They would watch the footage, and before they ever thought of challenging a human again, they would remember the soldier who never stopped, and they would ask themselves a single question. Do we really want to find out what happens when you push a human too far? Because now the galaxy knew the truth. Humanity doesn't have an off switch. And that is what made them the most terrifying species of all. It started as whispers, a cautionary tale. Stories passed between warlords, fleet commanders, and strategists. Some dismissed them as exaggerations. Surely no species could fight without limits. But then, they saw the footage. A lone human, battered and broken, still standing. A soldier whose body should have failed, yet refused to. And the realization sank in like cold steel. This was not a myth. This was not exaggeration. This was fact. The Catal were not the only ones who took notice. Soon, the story reached the halls of the Galactic Council. Military tacticians across the galaxy reviewed the footage in stunned silence. Some called for immediate non-aggression pacts with Earth. Others wanted studies to understand how a species could function like this. And a few suggested something even more radical. What if we fought with them instead of against them? Because if humans had no off switch, what if they were pointed in the right direction? Over time, the legend of the unstoppable humans grew. Some fleets refused to engage them in combat. Others made quiet alliances, ensuring that humans always had a seat at the table. Not because of goodwill, not because of diplomacy, but because every commander in the galaxy knew the truth. If you push a human too far, they won't just fight back, they won't stop fighting. And that was a force no one was willing to test again. Generations later, cadets at war academies would ask, why did no one ever conquer Earth? Why were humans left alone? And their instructors would only show them a single piece of footage, a broken, bleeding human, still standing. And the cadets would understand because some species have limits. Humans are not one of them.